How do narcissists save money on their electricity bills? Hi, welcome to the Authentic Action Podcast. I'm Angel, and today's topic is ghosting, gaslighting, and breadcrumbing. A little bit of narcissism sprinkled in, if I could say it correctly. And really, these are, buzzwords, as you probably already know. You may already be triggered from one or more of those. Uh, they're being thrown around a lot, talked about a lot, used a lot. And so I wanted to talk about them through my own personal lens and also through the lens of the question of, are we overusing them, and or are those labels doing us any good? That's probably a title of a future book. Speaking of books, I'm just about finished with The Shift. That's my upcoming book, The Shift: Own Your Emotions, Own Your Life. Now I can't even remember what the subtitle is. I've been working on it for nearly 5 years, writing it for 3 years, a little over 3 years. And I'm happy to say I'm working on the last of the graphics. It's in the final editing, and it should be out in March. If you're interested, find a link and sign up. I got a free PDF just for giving me your email called the 2-Minute Tools. That's 100 or more easy, free, well, maybe not easy, but simple tools that we all can access to help become more emotionally fit. And in particular, to help us with emotional regulation, but also expression of our feelings. I want us to be able to feel our feelings and express them. And that is why today's topic, gaslighting, ghosting, and breadcrumbing, with a little sprinkle of narcissism splashed in there, is apropos for what I've been working on for all these years and what I want to be talking about, hopefully, for the next few years to come, because I think it's a very important topic. I think emotional regulation saves lives, your own and other people's. So I hope trying to scooch around because I'm noticing my framework is needs some work. Anyhow, let's dive into these topics. And again, I want to look at the frame of, are these labels really doing us any good, or where are they doing us good and where are they harming us? Because I think we often, as they say, mistake the finger for the moon, and these labels that we use are not the things that they're pointing to, just like the finger is not the moon that it's pointing to. And so I think it's worth pausing frequently as we're using these words so often and thinking about, what do they really mean and how are we applying them? And are we applying them in ways that are actually helping us, or are they sometimes hurting us? Now, all of these terms, I have thought to myself, that person is being narcissistic, or that person is gaslighting me, or that person is ghosting me, or that person is breadcrumbing me. And I'm pretty sure that other people have thought the same about me. And I've even thought the same about myself, wondering, because I'm that kind of self-reflective person. Yay, yay, me. Give myself a little pat on the ego. It's a little ego stroke there. Um, the point being, at least in our culture, and I think just in humans in general, narcissistic tendencies, as we've been defining them, are prevalent. And often we see these and then we say, oh, that person is a narcissist, when really that's a pretty extreme. It's the same thing that's happening with so many things. I don't even mention some of the buzzwords, but again, there's anytime we're taking something to an extreme, maybe we could pause and reflect on how accurate that is. Is that really true? Is that the whole truth and nothing but the truth? Um, Often I think we are exaggerating. So, um, I'm going to come back around to narcissism, one of my favorite topics, I suppose. Many of my favorite people are quite narcissistic, and many of the favorite things about myself fall under that category of narcissistic traits, such as being a good leader, a good entrepreneur, looking out for myself, setting firm boundaries, which, again, yay me, I'm trying to get better at. So, um, I think it gets real muddy in there, and that gray, nuanced area is where I like to dance around, explore, dive a little deeper. So, coming back around, let's just set narcissism down for a little bit and dive a little bit into ghosting and gaslighting, something I just last night accused someone of, not just in my mind, which happens fairly frequently, but actually via a text or a Snapchat. I'm going to be a little bit distracted because I'm going to be looking over here because I want to read the actual definitions a little bit and then get into some definition, into some discussion from my perspective. So, ghosting, again, I think we all are familiar with these terms, but I just want to lay the framework a little bit, groundwork of where I'm coming from and what does, Wikipedia have to say today. So Wikipedia says ghosting is a behavior also called simmering and icing. I'm paraphrasing here, but colloquial terms. I keep discovering new words that are hard for me to say. That's exciting. Um, that describe the practice of suddenly ending all communication and avoiding contact with the other person without any apparent warning or explanation, and ignoring any subsequent attempts to communicate. Now, I think I wanted to start with this one because I didn't know when I looked this up just a little while ago that what I'm about to tell you, a fun fact, but even just reflecting on what I do know about it and why I had accused a former bandmate of ghosting and gaslighting me, and he seemed genuinely a little bit confused about it. And this is a familiar pattern in my life, and I've been on both sides of it, really. And so, in reading the Wikipedia definition, so that I have this little conversation today or monologue, as the case may be, I ran into a fun fact that I didn't know, which is that in 2018, a study found that women are more likely to ghost than men, and also found that often not just women, I think these were two separate facts, and I haven't had a chance to dive deeper into that. But another interesting thing that I felt intuitively, but I was interesting to find on Wikipedia is that often people use ghosting for pro-social reasons, as in not to hurt someone else's feelings, not to cause emotional pain, either for themselves or others, not to cause, a scene. And indeed, this was what my bandmate or former bandmate cited was, not wanting to stir up drama. And so, I mean, and that's understandable, right? I think we've all been or can at least understand that side of the equation of like really just wanting to avoid a huge bit of drama, or like one of the studies found that a fairly large percentage, it's in front of me sort of, but I'd have to scroll. I think I want to say 65% of people just said out of 1,000 polled, said they just weren't into the person anymore. And so rather than hurt feelings, they just sort of ghosted them, right? Um, and this is a good time to mention breadcrumbing, because breadcrumbing, I think, is what tends to make that feel extra cruel a lot of times. And indeed, um, ghosting has been described by some health professionals as a form of emotional abuse, being a passive aggressive form of emotional abuse. In my experience, it's also just a coping strategy for avoidant, it's an avoidant technique. There's a kind of a wide array of how narcissistic or self-centered a person might be when they're using it. Sometimes, as the study that I mentioned found many times people are actually trying their best, or at least the story they're telling in their minds is that they're trying their best to avoid hurting feelings or avoid emotional pain. So, um, and I know from my own relationships, it gets complicated. Sometimes there are children and other people involved. Sometimes it feels like that old rip the band-aid off, just, avoid contact is the best. Now, when you pair that with breadcrumbing, which is um, a form of intentional or unintentional manipulation, and again, I think at least the way I feel about things, it seems to matter what someone's intention is. This always intrigues me because the result can be the same. Like you can be lied to or deceived or made a fool of, but somehow it feels a lot worse when the person was intending to do it or doing it on purpose as opposed to accidentally. I don't know, you can let me know if you agree, if you've experienced similarly. I suspect you have. I think most people have. This is something I've been intrigued by for a couple decades now, pretty actively. So any case, there's a wide spectrum of reasons why we humans, men and women, engage in ghosting behavior. And according to Wikipedia, it has been increasing. I'm not sure if it's increasing or we're just using that label more often because we seem to be using all the, we like labels, right? And labels for organizing garages, labels are wonderful and also for making sense of things, other things in the world, for sure. Again, I would just remind us all not to confuse the label for the thing in the container that the label is, is generalizing. So, um, and to remember that all these labels, narcissist, ghosting, gaslighting, breadcrumbing, all of them have a spectrum and both of effect outcomes and a spectrum of negative or positive intentions, a spectrum of consciousness. Probably many people are just acting out in patterns that they grew up knowing and often not without even thinking about it, in my experience, including myself. And I've spent a lot of my life doing my best to try to become more self-aware, and it's been painful at times, and I'm still quite unaware a lot of the time. And so I try to have a lot of compassion and grace and patience for myself and for my fellow human beings who have various degrees of consciousness and various degrees of awareness about what their intentions really even are, and let alone the effects. And that's another part of the equation worth mentioning, is that on top of not even being aware of our own intentions sometimes, or just doing the best we can and not having that be very good. Maybe we didn't grow up with very good examples of how to form healthy attachments, chaotic attachment style, anyone? Um, I'm raising my hand there. Even with that, like, we have no control or way of knowing most of the time the other person's filters and way that they're gonna, perceive what our intentions are. And so there's often this um, disconnect between intentions and perceptions that happens in all of these things where, narcissistic behavior, for example, might be the person engaging in that type of behavior from a different person's perspective might be doing it like for the greater good in their mind. In fact, that's frequently a story that a leader type of person or someone who seems very selfish might be in their mind telling the story of, I'm doing this for, my family or my country or some greater good. Yeah, it gets complicated, and more often than not, people are doing their best to act with good intentions, I believe. Now, as they say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Many times the outcomes of those intentions are not as positive as intended. and vice versa. Sometimes they're more positive than intended. Um, and of course, sometimes people are, I would argue that those minority of times when people are really acting out of true intended maliciousness, that's usually because they've been really wounded and hurt. That's certainly a conversation for many other days. I just wanted to mention that there. That's my belief. I know not everyone agrees with that, or maybe some people don't believe that that should be factored into the equation, whether it's true or not. And I can understand that a little bit. Um, let's move on to gaslighting. I'm going to go here and just make sure that I'm still in frame. I haven't knocked anything over. All right. Uh, I'll take a little sip of my coffee. I don't think my webcam won't pick up this symbol. Hopefully that wasn't too loud. I know I've tried to sing it before and had it block the sound, so we'll see what happens there. Anyway, I'm all for experimenting. I just wanted to break the sound barrier for a minute there and signal my own internal system as I move into gaslighting. And also, I was checking, make sure the camera is still on, and it is. So, gaslighting, again, another term, label that I think we're all pretty familiar with, and that is being used a lot. And I didn't know, but upon looking it up, it says it was first used in the mid 20th century. And I'll get into the definition, but I just wanted to briefly talk about the history of it. The first known use of gaslighting was in 1961. I thought I had a fun fact for you, but now I'm not finding it. Anyway, I think most of us know what gaslighting is, but let me give us the working definition just so we're on the same page, which is the act or practice of grossly misleading someone, especially for one's own advantage. Also, a psychological manipulation of a person, usually over an extended period of time, that causes the victim to question the validity of their own thoughts, perception of reality, or memories, and typically leads to confusion, loss of confidence and self-esteem, uncertainty of one's emotional stability, and a dependency on the perpetrator. I think kind of obviously this sounds like a more extreme form of emotional abuse than potentially ghosting, which I think has a lot more gray area. Gaslighting is often a very intentional form of abuse. Now, I'm stammering there a little bit hesitant because I do think that there's some gray area there. I think there's less of a gray area, and perhaps that yeah, I'm sighing because I'm trying to think of an example, and then I'm gazing over here, and it's mentioning that this doesn't just happen in romantic or couple relationships. It also can happen between friends and other family members. And then it also actually goes into how it can be used for political gain. And I would argue that right now there's this mass gaslighting going on. And there is some conversation of that where gaslighting is used um, to make it difficult to discern what's true and what's propaganda, distorting the news for political gain, and effectively blaming children for being addicted to social media and conveniently ignoring how companies have intentionally designed their products to have addictive features. So you can see how, again, there's a wide spectrum of what we might call gaslighting, and like take advertising is probably a good example of of that gray area of nuance of where's the line between conscious intention to manipulate and harm someone and make them feel crazy or make them unhealthy, and the line between just offering people more options for cake and candy. So um I think, like anything, when we really dive into it deep enough, we can see there are quite a few there's a gray area. And again, I want to connect the dots between ghosting, breadcrumbing, and gaslighting, and then that intentionality on that spectrum of narcissism. So I think a lot of times we could, any of us might ghost someone, as in just stop, suddenly stop contact, maybe to protect ourselves, maybe to protect them, maybe because we're just shitty people and we don't care enough to, you know, give them a kind word. I know that the last time that this happened to me that's still traumatic for me was now about 4 years ago, and it was after about a 5 year off and on, traumatic sort of spiraling downward relationship for the last several years of that. And so there was a lot of breadcrumbing involved. There was a lot of narcissistic tendencies involved, but there was also, um, yeah, it wasn't just so, that ghosting at the end, that sudden tearing away of contact, even though it was super painful and made me feel, question my sanity and threw me into a very deep tailspin of depression and questioning, not being able to trust people. I also can see how it was sort of the only way to disengage from this constant looping, trauma looping that he and I were doing for a long period of time. So, um, again, I think it gets complicated, and I'm not trying to say that we should always forgive somebody, or, I mean, maybe I would say that because I think it's, again, another topic for another conversation, but carrying around, not forgiving, is just carrying around poison, expecting it to make someone else sick, I think is the saying goes. But yeah, I had an example here about, I'm looking at my notes here, the origin story. Um, and understand my own writing. But I wanted to mention about a personal example I had of gaslighting that was unintentional that I think exemplifies what happens a lot of times. And it was back when I was a teenager and I was at my first rainbow gathering with a dear friend of mine who's like a sister to me and now, and we've been friends since all the way back then. And we've laughed about this incident quite a few times. So we were both on LSD for one of the first times. We were at this rainbow gathering. We were in Texas in the woods, and she had never seen um, a lot of what we were seeing. And I had, but not in a while, because I had moved from the coast to New Mexico. So we were literally tripping on LSD and traipsing through this scenic woodsy area, probably half naked young women having a time of, having a really terrific time. And she said to me, like, "Hey, do you see little fairies or little lights, in the bushes?" And I was like, "No, you're hallucinating." And to me, because I was high as well, we were both very high. And so, um, I think everything was sparkly to me, and I didn't really realize it until, like, I think we went to the river that afternoon, and then we were on our way back that evening when I noticed that there were fireflies all along the trail. And I hadn't seen fireflies since I was a child. And when she'd first asked me about the lights, I just assumed she was hallucinating. And so I basically gaslit her unintentionally by telling her she was crazy and that she was hallucinating and, that there weren't anything there. And of course, since we were both high, she believed she was hallucinating. And then later when I saw the fireflies, she was not seeing them initially and for being so certain that she was hallucinating. So I just wanted to offer that as an example of, now we were high, yes, but how many people in life are distracted or even high or yeah, distracted by emotion? I think this is very much what's going on right now with this societal gaslighting that is going on I mean, I think from everyone's perspective. From my perspective, it's been revving up and getting worse and worse and worse. And even though I think there's a real disagreement about, what side is gaslighting, what feel gaslit, and then as a result, then a lot of times there's this ghosting that goes on. You see it in social media right now where people go, you know what, I'm just going to break contact and not explain why, because I think you must be this kind of person or that kind of person. And so there's all this assuming and lack of communicating that's going on that's just leading to a lot of bad feelings. So overarchingly across this whole conversation, what I really want to try to get across is that communication is a good thing. I know that sounds really probably very simple. Pardon me. And, I know that it can be very messy. Believe me, I know. And I also know that sometimes some things are better left unsaid or let to simmer for a while. Ask me how I know that. As a person who tends to be confrontational and push things sometimes when other people would rather let them simmer, I totally can appreciate how that's not always the best idea. But here's the thing is there's no one way. There's no one best way. Us as humans learning to communicate and as individuals learning to navigate our relationships and with our friends and family and bandmates and with our society at large and between countries, we need to learn how to not jump all the way to extremes is probably the number one thing, to not let ourselves get so emotionally upset or so emotionally shut down that we're not able to express ourselves and try to communicate. And I think one of the big factors in that is that we need to be willing to be imperfect because we're going to be. And we need to give each other, one another, grace for being imperfect, some imperfection, and be willing to like hold some space for each other if we get the words wrong or we we say it off the cuff and we often get it wrong. Here's the thing. If we just tit for tat, so to speak, and come back with the worst because someone else said the worst in our mind, the thing that we were waiting, often there's this sense that people are like waiting for this trigger word, and then people have this comeback that often to me seems very programmed. Yeah, a lot of it is clearly programmed because I hear many people saying the same phrases. And I know that's always been the case. We humans do that. And, I do it too. Like there's good and bad reasons that we might do that. Again, I think the key is to try to bring ourselves present, try to stay conscious. I was just listening to a great conversation about consciousness, and there's all this conversation about is AI, how will we know when AI is conscious or is it already conscious? And how do we define consciousness? And are ants conscious and are rocks conscious? And is consciousness a broad field that everything exists in, or is it a thing that only humans have? And I often think when I hear these conversations that many humans, I mean, for one, we go to sleep every night, and most of us would agree that we're relatively unconscious. Of course, an anesthesiologist or, a doctor who deals with people in a coma would point out there's, again, consciousness is on a spectrum and there are different levels of consciousness. Some of us, like myself, are light sleepers and most of the time relatively easy to wake up if there's a sound, and then others sleep very, very deeply. And maybe they're conscious in another realm. We don't really understand. We don't have a consensus on what consciousness even is in order to determine it. Is the consensus. And it used to be relatively widely accepted that most animals, well, didn't have consciousness, and now it's pretty widely accepted that some animals do. And I would say I would say only some humans are conscious some of the time. But again, it depends on how you define that label. That comes down to that semantics. And I think it's worth mentioning, since I dove into that little tangent rabbit hole, that self-awareness, awareness of consciousness might be what a lot of times we're thinking about, or a distinction that might help us in that conversation. I would love to know if you have any thoughts about that, because I feel like it's a very prevalent conversation right now, and yeah, it's worth diving into. And maybe next week's podcast will be about that. Speaking of wrapping it up, I should mention my sponsors, which are myself, and I, and my company, about 30-year-old company now or more, believe since 1998. I can't even do the math on that. Any case, Sleeping Dragons Company, which you can currently find on Etsy and hopefully back on my own website soon, where I carry phthalate-free aromatherapy blends, perfumes, fragrances, polished heart-shaped stones, and other great self-love and unique gifts. So stop on by there and check it out. And also the Authentic Action Academy, where I'm building a community of creators, teachers, learners, where we can help explore new strategies and tools and ways of thinking about education. And in particular, I have a passion for multi-medium, multi-age, multi-level education. So check that out if you're interested. I'm building a community over on the school platform right now, and there are some other areas you might find that and or me. So um, also want to mention my book again, The Shift, Own Your Emotions, Own Your Life. Should be out by March, and I am currently getting copies to my beta readers. If you're interested in that in the very near future, let me know. Um, yeah, if you're interested in the PDF that came about as I was writing that book called 2-Minute Tools for Emotional Regulation or something like that, let me know. That's over 100 tools that I just compiled in a alphabetized glossary of sorts, and it's a good resource to look at in case you're looking for ideas to help heal yourself from trauma or help improve your own self-regulation skills, or help improve your own self-awareness, maybe become more conscious of ways that you might be gaslighting, or you might be ghosting, you might be breadcrumbing, or you might be acting like a narcissist sometimes. Hey, I'm only comfortable saying that because I can say I definitely have engaged in all of those. I have, as I just gave you an example, engaged in gaslighting, both consciously and unconsciously, I'm sure. And I have engaged in ghosting, again, both consciously and unconsciously, I'm sure. And I have definitely engaged in breadcrumbing, um, probably for good and not so good reasons. If I check myself, sometimes it's been because I knew, I really knew I wasn't into someone, but I kind of just want a little ego stroke now and then. I've done that. And I've had people do it to me, and it's not that fun because you get a little led on, and then you kind of know that you knew that they weren't into you, but then they send you a flattering message or something, and you get a little spark of hope, a little dopamine hit, and you think, oh, maybe, and then you're led on a little bit more, and then you feel gaslit or ghosted. That's I've engaged in this cycle probably more than my fair share, so I feel well qualified to speak to it. How about you? I am interested to know. I did not check the time when I started this video, so I have no idea how long it is, but let me check my notes over here. I mentioned again that this study found that women are more likely to ghost than men, and I found that pretty interesting. And I would love to know if you found that interesting, if you're like, that seems intuitive to you. I kind of, because I'm a woman and I've felt ghosted by men more than women. I think in my mind, I felt like men do more ghosting or are more avoidant. But putting it in the context of what this study also found, which was that often people do the ghosting for pro-social reasons, as in, not wanting to cause emotional pain. So not like antisocial reasons, which again, sometimes people are ghosting for antisocial reasons. And I would add that sometimes those antisocial reasons are because they are wounded themselves. They're depressed, or they're just don't have any social skills, or they've, had enough trauma from past relationships that they just want to avoid all that drama, as what happened with my bandmate, as I mentioned there. So I think it's important that we all try to check ourselves, both in how we're using these terms to accuse other people sometimes and just dismiss behaviors that might be worthy of a little more contemplation, and how we might be engaging in these behaviors ourselves, how maybe we can become a little bit more self aware, a little bit more conscious, a little bit more compassionate, and more effective communicators. I'm voting yes on that. Can I get a hey? Can I get a hells yeah? I don't know, something. Raise your hand if you're with me. And yeah, let's let's all commit to trying our best to be more effective and also more compassionate and patient communicators. If we could just do that, I think we could really raise the bar collectively, societally. We could hold our media sources to a higher standard and just call bullshit when there's bullshit and not get all upset about it. We don't have to fight over it. We can just matter of factly, as I did with my bandmates, say, hey, we need to set something straight. I see through your bullshit. Your slip is showing, and enough is enough. And the same to ourselves. When I catch myself, and it's, I don't know if it's harder to do it to ourselves or to each other. It's uncomfortable in both directions, but it does get easier with practice, like almost everything. And that's because there's such a relief that happens when we tell the truth to ourselves and to others, when we dissolve that mystery, when we stop gaslighting ourselves and each other, when we stop the ghosting. Um, that allows us to just clear the whole, clear that tension, like set the reset button, and remember who we are. Remember that we're human beings doing the best that we can with what we have from where we are, and that we're all going to make mistakes. But if we give ourselves that grace, and then we keep trying and we learn from our mistakes, then I think we can all both have better lives individually and help make a better life for each other collectively. And it's really my wish for all of this, what I'm here doing and what I hope you're here doing as well. So thank you for joining me today on the Authentic Action Podcast. It has been a pleasure, and I would love to hear from you if you have any thoughts about anything I said. If you want to fight about it, or you want to agree with me, or you want to let me know your own experiences. I love all of that, and I welcome all of that. I am getting ready to get back to interviews on the Authentic Action Podcast, and I'm really excited about that, as I've been working on this book for so long, so hard. It feels really good to be wrapping it up. And as my promotional strategy is going to be to both have as many people as I can that I've mentioned in my book on for interviews, and also be a guest on as many interviews or as many other people's podcasts as I can to talk about these ideas. So I'm really hoping to rev up more conversations. If you have a podcast that you think I would be a good match for, please contact me. 2025 for me is going to be a year of many podcasts if things go according to my plans. Of course, no plan survives first contact. I like to remind myself, but in any case, that is the plan, and I will continue to show up for it and do my best. And let me wrap it up with this joke, as I like to always start and end with a very silly joke. And today's joke was, how do narcissists save money on their electricity bills? Give yourself a minute to think of the answer, because we've been talking about it all this time. They use gaslighting. But you're welcome. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Give me a 5-star review and all that jazz, and I'll be seeing you soon. Ciao for now.